Kancana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vachanam pangam langate girim yatprapatamam vande Shri Gurudina Taranam Parmanandam Madhavam. So resuming our discussion from the 27th chapter titled Understanding Material Nature, and we will start from verse 19. Akruta karma bandhoyam purushasya yadashrayah guneshu satshu prakritihi kaivalyam te shvatah katham. Hence, even though he is the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as long as material nature acts on him and binds him? So these are the series of questions asked by Devahuti in response to Lord Kapila's description of the process of Gyan, which would liberate a practitioner from Prakriti. So she says, it's actually, I find it very difficult to accept that. And from the 17th verse, she basically speaks 4 verses. And the 17th verse, she says that the reason she finds it impossible is because there is an eternal attraction between material nature and the conditioned jiva. So this is not new, and this is not something that is that is a flash in the pan. It's not an infatuation. She says that it is eternal. It's been happening since time immemorial. So how can they be separate? And then she says that intelligence and consciousness are intrinsic with to one another. She gives that example of earth and aroma and water and taste. So similarly, she says that just like wherever there is earth, there is aroma. Wherever there is water, there is taste. Wherever there is consciousness, there is intelligence. So alluding to the fact that it is this intelligence that is eternally concomitant with consciousness that is the cause of this bondage. And in this verse, she says that even though he is the performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul for the soul as long as material nature acts on him and binds him? So Srila Prabhupada comments that since Devahuti is gradually coming to the point of surrender, her questions are very intelligent. So this is interesting, that one should expect that as one comes closer to surrender, the need to question also reduces. And Srila Prabhupada seems to be saying the opposite. But the point that he's making is that it's not that her questions are reducing, but the relevance of her question is increasing. So questioning is always there. Before surrender, during surrender, after surrender, It's just that the nature of the questions change. One who is surrendered will ask questions that are of the nature that Devahuti is asking. That how can one be liberated? How can one forcibly detach from material nature? So the point that she's making in this verse is that Maya Devi is the eternal external energy of the Lord, which means that even the Lord cannot extricate himself from Maya, and he's all powerful. So what hope is there for Jiva? Not only is the Jiva powerless in front of Prakriti, he is actually a willing participant. So she says that the Jiva is further implicated by its own activities. So what are these activities? These are the material activities. And the reason Srila Prabhupada says Devahuti is asking intelligent questions is because these activities are actually being performed by Prakriti. So then we can see how the complexity is there. That the activities performed by the Jiva causes its bondage with Prakriti. But actually these activities are performed by Prakriti on behalf of the Jiva. Srila Prabhupada quotes that it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Prakriti Kriya Manani Guna. So this is 327. That actually the Jiva thinks itself to be the doer, but Prakriti Kriya Manani. All of it is done by Prakriti. So if one might say that the Jiva might use its activities to extricate itself from the grasp of Prakriti, Devahuti is saying that is not possible because those activities are actually not even done by Prakriti, not even done by Jiva, they are actually done by Prakriti. So Prabhupada says, in other words, he has no opportunities to get out of control. And the other complexity is, Prabhupada says that in Bhagavad Gita, it is also stated that it is very difficult to get out of the clutches. So one might say that if the problem is that the Prakriti is acting on your behalf, then you extricate yourself from Prakriti. The Devotee says not possible because they are eternally been associating with one another. And Srila Prabhupada adds another point here from Bhagavad Gita that it is very difficult to get out of the clutches. So this is Devi Hayesha Gunamai Mamaya Duratya. Lord Krishna himself says very difficult to get out of the clutches of Prakriti. So in this way, Devahuti is systematically building up this notion that the separation of Jiva from the conditioning illusory energy is impossible. Okay, next verse 20. Kochi tvatva marshena nevritam bhayam mulbanam anivrita nimattatva punaha pratyavatisthate. Even if the great fear of bondage is avoided by mental speculation and inquiry into fundamental principles, it may still appear again, since its cause has not ceased. So what's the point Devahuti is making here? That the lack of liberation of the Jiva is not because of his lack of trying. So there are those who have gone through the process of Gyan and Vigyan. But all that they get is temporary relief. She says, Pratyavatisthate, that it appears again. So perhaps what is being talked about here is temporary liberation. But based on the facts that she has stated, she's saying permanent liberation is not possible. And she's sharing this from personal and empirical experience. So in a way, what we see is that she is challenging the Lord. He had said that liberation is possible. Devavati is saying it's not possible. Based on what she knows, what she has seen, and what she has experienced. So this challenging is, in a way, good challenging. Sometimes the Guru, he places concepts to test either the level of advancement of the disciple or the sincerity of the disciple. Right? We see in the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, when Parishit Maharaj asks Sukdev Goswami that how can one avoid going to the hellish planets? And Sukdev Goswami, how does he test Parishit Maharaj? So he gives him the path of atonement. He says that by atoning for your sinful reactions, for your sinful actions, you will get relief from this suffering and from possibly falling down to hellish planets. And Maharaj Parishit challenges him. He's saying this is like the elephant taking a bath, that when it comes out, it will again put mud on itself. So essentially what he's saying is that what you're saying is good, but not good enough. So Sukdev Goswami, seeing that Maharaj Parishit is ready, gives him the higher answer, which essentially is the path of bhakti. We see a similar testing appearing later on in the 10th canto, when Sukdev Goswami begins to talk about the rasa pastime. And there, Maharaj Parikshit, he fails the test. Maharaj Parikshit, he says that how is it possible that the personality of Godhead is consorting with the wives of other married men and acting in an immoral way? And then Maharaj and Sukdev Goswami, he simply says that the activities of great people should not be judged by contemporary standards. And then he moves on. He does not speak more because he realizes that Maharaj Parikshit is not ready to receive that knowledge. So similarly here we see that Lord Kapila has placed the tattvas in front of Devahuti in a way that is testing her. Is she going to accept this superficial effect of Gyan Vigyan, or is she going to ask for something deeper? So Devahuti is saying that one may theoretically analyze and say that by knowledge he has become freed. But actually, as long as the cause exists, anivritta nimittavat, the person is not free. This is very similar to what Parishit Maharaj says, where he says that a person may repent for the activities, but as long as the propensity to commit sinful activities is there, he will commit it again and again. Same thing, similar thing Devahuti is saying. That by practicing all these angas that you have said, one may get temporary relief from material conditioning. One may even get liberated temporarily. But anivritta nimittvat. But the cause stays. And what is that cause? Srila Prabhupada explains that cause is ichha dvesh. What is the ichha? The ichha is to enjoy. And dvesh is envy. So the ichha is to enjoy like Krishna. And dvesh is envy of Krishna. Prabhupada says in Bhagavad Gita 7:27, ichha dvesha samuttena. That two kinds of propensities arise in the living entity. Ichha, which means the desire to lord it or to be as great as the Supreme Lord. And Dvesh is envy of Krishna. That why should Krishna be all in all? I am as good as Krishna. So they both are saying, as long as this root cause is there, simply addressing the external manifestations may give only temporary relief. So earlier on, she had completely rejected Lord Kapila's presentation, saying that liberation is not possible because she gives a reason that Prakriti and Jiva are eternally been associating with one another and associating happily. No one is forcing. The Prakriti is not forcing Jiva or vice versa. And this association is becoming stronger and stronger because of the activities that are performed by the Jiva, which are actually performed by Prakriti. So there is no way out. And then she said, even somehow, if the Jiva is able to liberate himself, that liberation will be temporary because the root cause of the association between the Jiva and Prakriti, which is Ichhadvesh, still remains. So we can see that even though she says that I'm not very intelligent, but she's extremely intelligent and she has presented things in a systematic way for clarification from Lord Kapila. So now in the next set of verses, Lord Kapila will address these doubts in Devahuti. Verse 21, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Animitta Nimittena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivriyamaya Bhaktyacha Shruta Sambratyachiram. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. So to respond to these questions by Devahuti, 3 verses are spoken by Lord Kapila, 21 to 23, in which he recommends Tivra Bhakti, saying that I can be attained by intense practice, and 23 is the consequence of that the influence of Prakriti gets removed. So essentially what Lord Kapila is saying, that if the cause of the bondage is manifested in the symptom, then you have to do something else. And that something else is bhakti. So he is not refuting Devahuti's objections, but he's deflecting them. So Devahuti was working with a single premise, that through the process of karma, jnana, astang, one will try to attain liberation. They are difficult to do because conditioned jiva, etc., etc. So we discussed the reasons. So Lord Kapila is saying that fine, but there is another process that will help you, which is Tivra Bhakti. And Tivra Bhakti or Bhakti, it does not suffer from the limitations that you have said. So she had said that the activities that are performed by the person continues to bind the person to Prakriti. And Lord Kapila says that one gets liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, by executing one's prescribed duties. So this is Devi Varnashram that he's talking about. That you don't have to stop executing your duties. And you don't have to fear that by the execution of these duties you will get bound. But actually, when they are performed in the context of bhakti, they will free you from the contamination of matter. So this is addressing Devahuti's objection of the eternal intimate association of Jiva and Prakriti. So Sridhar Swami comments in this connection that by association with material nature, one does not become conditioned. So he's explaining how the process of bhakti liberates the jiva. So he's saying that one does not become conditioned by the association of material nature, but it's the other way around. That when one becomes conditioned, then one begins to associate with material nature. So the solution to this problem is not to disassociate with material nature, but to remove conditioning. The association with material nature is a symptom of conditioning. As long as the cause is there, the symptom will be. You may suppress the symptom, but it will come again as long as the cause is there. So this process of bhakti acts at a causal level. So one might say that the jiva and prakriti are so closely associated with one another. And then Sridhar Swami says that even the Supreme Lord is closely associated with the material world. That does not mean that he is contaminated by it. Why? Because he never accepts the influence of the modes of material nature. Similarly, the intimate association of jiva and prakriti is not the cause of the contamination of the jiva. The fact that the jiva accepts the influence of prakriti. So Srila Prabhupada explains this with an analogy. He says that not everyone who associates with the police department are criminals. Only those who have a criminal mentality, they have a binding association with the police. So Prakriti is there. When the Lord associates with Prakriti, or when the liberated souls associate with Prakriti, it's in a different way. Just like when the judge is associating with the police department, the judge has no fear of the police department because his mentality is not criminal. But the criminals have. And because of the criminal mentality, they are bound by the police department. They come under the control of the police department. But the law-abiding citizen, the police officers, the judge, etc., they are completely different. So similarly, when the Lord or his devotees associate with Prakriti, there's no binding influence over there. The binding influence is caused by the defective mentality of the jiva. So previously in the 6th verse of this chapter, Lord Kapila had given a general recommendation. He had said that my bhavena satyana, that you become attached to my form. And he had given this as an anga of Gyan and Yoga. Now in this verse, he expands on that how do you become attached to my form? So he gives 7 recommendations in this verse. Mai bhaktiya, he says, worship me. Shruta, listen to Krishna Katha. Tivraya, Tivraya means enthusiastically, energetically. Chiram, Chiram means for a long time. It also means consistently, without any break. Swadharmena, while executing one's prescribed duties. Srila Prabhupada translates Swadharmena as Paradharmena, while executing your eternal duty, and both are equally relevant. Sixth is Amalatmana, with a pure mind, and seventh is Animitta Nimittena, without desiring the fruits of activities. This means that the practitioner does not have any desire other than that of liberation. So this is not Anabhilashata Shunyam. This is not Shuddha Bhakti. It's still Mishra Bhakti, but it is not mixed with the material modes. The person has desires for liberation, but does not have any material desires. So Prabhupada says that in another place in the Bhagavatam, it is said, Swa anusthasya dharmasya samsadir haritoshana. So this is 1-30. And there it is said that everyone has some prescribed duties to perform, but the perfection of such duties will be reached only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari is satisfied by such actions. Samsadir Haritoshana. Here Prabhupada quotes this phrase quite a bit. Samsadir, do whatever you do for the pleasure of the Lord. And then he gives the example of Arjun. That Arjun fought, and he fought externally to defeat his enemy. He fought externally to win a kingdom so that he could rule. But internally he fought only for the satisfaction of Krishna. As a Kshatriya, his prescribed duty was to fight on grounds of dharma, which he did, but samsadir haritoshana. And Prabhupada says that is Krishna consciousness. And such activities are animitta nimittena, that they will never produce any material reaction. And then he says, this serious devotional service can develop by hearing for long periods of time. Chanting and hearing is the beginning of the process of devotional service. One should associate with the devotees and hear from them about the Lord's transcendental appearance, activities, disappearance, instruction, etc. Later he says, by continuous regular hearing of the effects of the contamination of lust and greed to enjoy or lord it over the material nature diminish. And when lust and greed diminish, one can become situated in the mode of goodness. This is the state of Brahman realization or spiritual realization. In this way, one can become fixed on the transcendental platform. Remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. So Srila Prabhupada here is acknowledging that bhakti has been practiced as an anga of Gyan. Right? Because this process of Shravana Kirtana, this is the process that takes us back to Krishna. But here he is saying that Brahman realization, because this is what the practitioner is desiring, at least at this stage. Okay, verse 22. Jnanina drishtatattvena vairagyena baliyasa tapoyuktena yogena tivrena atmasamadhina. This devotional service has to be performed strongly, in perfect knowledge, and with transcendental vision. One must be strongly renounced, and one must engage in austerity and perform mystic yoga in order to be firmly fixed in self-absorption. So two more qualities of bhakti are being enunciated by the Lord. Jnanena drashta tattvena. So this is the following or pursuing the path of Gyan. So what is Gyan over here? Understanding the nature of the body, the nature of the soul, the nature of the Lord, Atma Gyan. So all these are Atmas. The Deha is the Atma, the soul is the Atma, super soul, Lord is Atma. But he says Jnanina drashta tattvena, which means that Gyan along with Vigyan. So the pursuit of knowledge should be accompanied with a practical realization of the tattvas. Else it will simply become speculative or mundane knowledge that will not bear any fruit. And the way to convert Gyan into Vigyan is by acting as per the tenets of the knowledge. Right? So you get some knowledge that by eating this kind of food, your health will improve. It's Gyan, it's knowledge. You can tell that to other people also. But only when you start eating that kind of food and you see that your health is improving, it becomes Vigyan. Then you can share your realizations. So Lord Kapila is saying Jnana Drashta Tattvena, knowledge accompanied with realization. What else should accompany this? He says, Vairagena Baliyasa. Strong renunciation must accompany the pursuit of all these practices. Because without material renunciation, one can never realize the tattvas. So, after having spoken about bhakti, he is clarifying about the pursuit of knowledge that he had spoken about. And that's why Srila Prabhupada there, he says that bhakti will take one to Brahman realization, because bhakti is an anga over here. It's Yoga Mishra, Bhakti or Jnana Mishra, Bhakti. Bhakti is there, but essentially it's the pursuit of Jnana. But even the Jnana needs to be pursued in a proper way. So the Lord is saying that Jnana Drashta Tattvena, the knowledge accompanied with realization, Vairagyena Baliyasa, strong renunciation, and then he says Tapa Yuktena Yogena, or the performance of austerity and yoga. Tapa is austerity, yoga, Yuktena, full of tapa and yoga. So in the 6th verse, Kapila Dev had said, Yamadbir Yoga Pather Abhyasa, that one must practice the path of yoga beginning with Yamadbir, Yama, etc. Abhyas, practice, Yoga Pather, this path of yoga, Yamadbir, by Yama, etc. So he's expanding on that, saying that as one practices that path of Astang, it must be accompanied with Tapa Yuktena. It must be accompanied with Tapa or austerities. And it must be Tivrena, which means that one should practice it to progress from one stage to another. So this is important because sometimes people stagnate at a particular stage of yoga simply because they get attracted by the results of it. This is actually the last warning. The last verse in this chapter is a warning on this. That when you're practicing yoga, at each stage you get some results. By practicing Yam Niyam, you get elevated to the mode of goodness, happiness. Right? By practicing asana, pranayam, your longevity increases, your health improves. And then by practicing pratyahara, dharana, and the higher stages, one begins to get siddhis. So it's important that it should be tivrena. One should not stagnate, just attracted by being in the mode of goodness or experiencing good health or longevity or siddhis, but take it all the way to maturity, that of samadhi. So we see that how the Lord in these verses is speaking about bhakti, he's spoken about gyan, he spoke about karma, do your prescribed duties, and he is speaking about astanga. So all these paths are there to nourish one another. Even a practitioner of bhakti takes shelter of gyan, right? That's why we're studying Bhagavatam. Even a practitioner of bhakti takes or can take shelter of astanga. There are devotees who do pranayam before before their job. So many devotees do asanas for better health, so that they can use their body to serve Krishna. So all these, uh, there's no like a wall of separation saying, oh, I am a bhakta, so I don't talk to me about gyan. I have nothing to do with gyan. I'm too good for gyan. I'm a pure devotee, right? Some people say I don't want anything to do with knowledge. Or somebody will look down upon a person who is doing yoga. This person is getting deviated now. But ultimately, where does the person's primary consciousness lie? In these set of verses, everything is being presented, but the primary consciousness of the person lies in Gyan. But he's taking nourishment from all other paths. Okay, verse 23. Prakriti Purushasyeha Dhayamana Tvaha Nisham Tiro Bhavitri Shankhe Agneryoni Ivarnahi. The influence of material nature has covered the living entity, and thus it is as if the living entity were always in a blazing fire. But by the process of seriously discharging devotional service, this influence can be removed, just as wooden sticks, which cause a fire, are themselves consumed by it. So now Lord Kapila is talking about the result of pursuing this path. That through this process, the subtle body of the living entity gradually burns away. So what is the subtle body carrying? It's carrying impressions. Impressions of what has been given to it by its past material activities. That's how we get desires, right? When we do sinful activities, we get the desire to perform more sinful activities. All those desires are being carried off in our subtle body. When we perform pious activities, they also sow the seeds of themselves in the subtle body. So when the subtle body is getting burnt away, then the desire to perform those activities are also getting burnt away. But this process is gradual. And the result is that the jiva is no longer attracted to material enjoyment. And the Lord gives an analogy that just like an anari stick is used to so these are, so when you do yagyas, then before you light the main fire of the yagya, because those woods are, the wood over there is heavy and takes a while to light up, so you use anari sticks that quickly catch fire, and then they are used to kindle the fire of the yagya. So the analogy is given that those anari sticks, they are the cause of the fire, and they get consumed by the fire itself. So similarly, a person on this path, he uses the cause of this material contamination, which is the gross and the subtle body, to burn themselves away. So the jiva is being trapped because of the impressions in the subtle body acted out by the gross body, and he uses the very same gross and subtle body, or the activities of the gross and subtle bodies, to burn them away. So what are the symptoms of the subtle body? Mind, intelligence. So in the pursuit of Jnana Yoga, he uses the very same mind and intelligence to burn away the subtle body. So what does this mean? That because the process is feeding itself, liberation is assured for a person practicing Jnana Yoga. That because the very same subtle body that Devahuti was saying is the cause of bondage, is now being used to burn away that bondage, that the liberation is assured. From a tattva perspective, essentially what Lord Kapila is assuring Devahuti, that Prakriti is not the cause of bondage for the jiva. The jiva is the cause of the bondage. Because he has the desire to enjoy Ichhadvesh, he accepts Prakriti. And why does the jiva accept Prakriti? Or why does he have this Ichhadvesh? Because of avidya. So Gyan, it goes after avidya. Gyan is vidya, and with the appearance of vidya, avidya disappears. With the disappearance of avidya, Ichhadvesh disappear. Because of Ichhadvesh, the desire of the jiva to take, or disappearing, Ichhadvesh disappearing, the desire of the jiva to take shelter of Prakriti disappears. So Lord Kapila is now, for the benefit of Devahuti and us, he is explaining this in greater details. And as I mentioned, this also indicates how the various paths are nourishing each other. Even though the process is that of Gyan, one performs Astang, Yamadvir, and Bhakti as supporting Angas. So, what's the process? That the initial instruction is Yamadvir, practicing the Angas of Astang. Then Lord Kapila says that this must be accompanied by the performance of austerities, which is then the further performance of Astang. He says Atma Samadhina, all the 8 limbs of Astang Yoga one must perform, all the way to maturity. Right. Then he says, listen to Krishna Katha for a long time. This is bhakti. Having accepted, he says, my form to be real, perform Tivriya Maya Bhaktiya. Perform intense devotional service directed towards me, with no desire other than that of liberation. Right. So we see Astang Yoga coming, we see Bhakti Yoga coming, and then he says that all this should be done according to Swadharma. So we see karma coming here, that one performs one's prescribed duties with the purified heart, amala. Gyan is now being focused upon. Then such a person contemplates the subject matter and transforms his realizations. Focus on Gyan accompanied with renunciation, accompanied with Vairagya. So by the following this process of Gyan, Vairagya, Astanga, Karma, and Bhakti, Lord Kapila is saying that the subtle body will gradually vanish. Liberation is guaranteed. But point to be noted here is prema is not being bestowed. Lord Kapila is not promising that. All he is promising is mukti. Okay. So let me pause over here. And the next verse is a pretty involved verse. So I'll pause over here and see if there's any discussion.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much for this this class. Actually, many things. First of all, you mentioned Jiva is not conditioned by association of Prakriti, but because Jiva is conditioned, then it associates with Prakriti. Am I correct? Is that statement?
Yes.
Okay. So the conditioning here we are talking about is Icha and Dvesha. That's the conditioning.
That is the cause of it.
So then what's conditioning then? My understanding was it was the material nature conditions us. That's my understanding. But here I'm hearing that different. First, the jiva gets conditioned and then associates with the material nature. And so,
So
can you elaborate?
so it depends on. You want to mute yourself. Thanks. So it depends on how deep down the chain of cause and effect we go. So yes, the jiva is conditioned by the material nature. The jiva is overpowered by the material nature. Why does the jiva get overpowered by the material nature? Because he desires to be overpowered by the material nature. And why does he desire? Because of ichhadvesh. Because he desires to be Krishna and he's envious of Krishna. And why is that ichhadvesh coming? Because of avidya. Because the person has forgotten their constitutional position. So the root of all this is avidya. From avidya comes ichhadvesh. From ichhadvesh comes the maya dakshena. And then after that comes the prakriti kriyamanani. That once the jiva says that, okay, my material nature, I surrender to you, then the material nature performs all the activities and the jiva suffers all the consequences of it.
Okay, Prabhu. Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I have another thing, but somebody else wants to.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Prabhu.
Desire for liberation, like you are explaining the process of how performing the yama, the controlling controlling process, and then jnana, and then ashtanga yoga, and all those things, but along with the bhakti, right? But then that is what leads us to the up to the liberation, up to mukti, you said, right? And that happens by dissolving the subtle body. That liberation happens. Now, does it mean that this liberation is not just Brahman realization, but it has some bhakti attached to it, meaning that we are still aware of the presence of personality of Godhead, and still on the platform of Brahman, we are still on not ready to go one step further to attain the prema. Um, because my understanding was, even if you're on the Brahman platform, you still have that icha dvesha little bit. That's why people fall down from the Brahman platform. But here we are talking about not that case. It's different. So can you please elaborate on that a little bit?
It's a very good question that is actually answered in just a few verses away. The exact question that you're asking is answered more comprehensively over there. If you can hold your question, if you feel it's not completely addressing it, then please feel free to ask it again. Okay. So if there are no more questions, let me move on to the next verse. So we'll move on to verse 24. Bhukta bhoga parityakta drishtadosha chanityashaha neshavarasya shubham dhate swe mahimni sthitasya cha. By discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. So in the 14th verse, Devahuti says that, does the material nature ever give release to the spirit soul? Since they are both attracted eternally to one another, how is separation possible? Lord Kapila is addressing that and he's saying absolutely. it is possible. And here he's saying that such a person is completely beyond the influence of Prakriti. And he gives 3 reasons in this verse. He says, Drishtadosha, that he sees the fault of the Bhukta Bhoga mentality. That I am the enjoyer and I'm the doer. So we just discussed that mentality is the cause of all the other. When he says that I am Bhukta Bhoga, then he begins to look for ways to satisfy that Bhukta Bhoga mentality. And then he says, okay, there's Prakriti over there. That can help me satisfy this Bhukta Bhoga. So he goes to Prakriti and says that, can you make this happen? And Prakriti says, absolutely. But to do that, you have to allow me to take control of you. The Jiva says, absolutely, no problem. Then the Jiva, Prakriti takes control of the Jiva. It performs the actions for the Jiva. The Jiva then goes into the stage of Bhukta Bhoga, and then of course gets trapped in the cycle of Prakriti. But Drishta Dosha, that because of this pursuit of knowledge, the person is now seeing Drishta Dosha. So Drishta Dosha is addressing avidya. So Drishta means he sees through Gyan Chakshu. He sees through the eyes of knowledge the dosha, the fault in this mentality. Second reason, Ishvarasya, that he now sees the difference between himself and the Lord. Right? So earlier on, Ichhadvesh was, I desire to be the Lord, and why is there Krishna? Ishvarasya, it negates the Ichhadvesha. He says, well, there is the Lord and there is me. The Lord is the enjoyer and I am not. And then the third is Swamahimni Tisasyasha, that he is now situated in his constitutional position. So because of these reasons, the Jiva is now beyond the grasp of Prakriti. Prem Kishore Prabhu, you may want to. Thank you. So because of that, he is now beyond the grasp of Prakriti. Or more accurately, he has now no interest in Prakriti because he was never in the grasp of Prakriti. He had surrendered himself to Prakriti. Prakriti is not malicious. Prakriti is not there looking for ways to beat up people. But Prakriti has a service that when people come to you with a desire of Bhukta Bhoga, you nourish them. So when that desire has gone away, the person turns away from Prakriti. Prakriti does not pursue the person. So it's also important to note that the first 2 reasons are not sufficient. They are necessary, but not sufficient. So Drishta Dosha, which is seeing the fault of Bhukta Bhoga, and Ishvarasya, which is seeing the difference, they have to be accompanied with Swamahimna Sthitasya. So this means that Gyan has to be accompanied with Vigyan. That the person, first 2 are can be attained through mental pursuits. Difficult, but possible. That the person says, yes, after analysis of everything, I understand this dosh, this wrong mentality that I have, and says that also I understand that that I am not the Lord. But these realizations, they should be accompanied with swamahimna sthithasya sa. Sthithasya sa means that he should situate himself. He should situate himself in this realization that I am acting on the platform of that I am not supposed to be the enjoyer. I'm acting on the platform of na ishvarasya, and I am not the Lord. And then one becomes truly beyond the grasp of Prakriti. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada, he quotes Bhagavad Gita 259 to make the same. So this is the higher taste verse. Vishya vinivartante nirasya dehinam rasovarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. So he says that just Vishaya vinivartante, which is giving up, can be done externally. It can be done rasavarjam. So rasavarjam is that you abstain from the engagement. Or it could be done nirarasya dehina, by circumstantially weakening the senses. But unless it is accompanied by param drishtva nivartate, unless it is accompanied by the superior understanding and following of that path, no change or no lasting change will happen. So the sense control of the jiva who is actually attaining the path of liberation is not circumstantial. It's not predicated on Vishya Vinivartante or Rasavarjam or Nirarasya Dehinam, but on constantly experiencing Param Drishtva Nivartate. By practicing and constantly experiencing a higher taste. Such a person, Lord Kapila is saying, will not fall into samsara. Now, what are the other assurances Lord Kapila is giving? He's saying that when a person frees himself from the grasp of Prakriti, that change is eternal and that change is irreversible. And this is again based on the understanding that it is not that Prakriti that is dominating Jiva, it is the Jiva that is accepting the dominion of Prakriti. So the battle is not between Jiva and Prakriti, where either Jiva wins or Prakriti wins, but the battle is between Jiva and himself. When by proper introspection, the Jiva gives up the mentality and accepts the dominion of the Lord, then he has won the battle with himself. And Prakriti becomes inconsequential there. So this clarifies the doubt of Mother Devahuti in verse 20, where she says that even if the great fear of bondage is avoided, it may still appear again, since the cause has not ceased. Lord Kapila is saying it will not appear again because the cause has ceased. The ultimate root cause of it is the jiva's defective mentality. Because that has been remediated, then even though everything else is still there, the jiva has a dehinam, Prakriti is there, Prakriti is always more powerful than jiva, all that is there. But because the root cause has been remediated, then that problem has been solved forever. Now, Srila Prabhupada mentions that actually it is bhakti that is delivering all these results. That is why the presence of bhakti is important. There is karma and gyan and astang with the dominance of gyan. There is bhakti also, listening to Krishna Katha. And actually bhakti is the one that is delivering this liberation. So then the question is that why does such a person need gyan and astang at all? If ultimately bhakti is delivering all the results, why don't they only practice bhakti? even if they are mumukshabis, even if they are ones who are desiring liberations, why do they have to follow Gyan and Astang if Bhakti in itself can give liberation? And the reason is that they do not have complete faith in Bhakti. So they practice Bhakti as a supporting Anga. And we see, we may know it experientially, and we see examples of that also. There are people who lack complete faith in Krishna. So on the altar, they have Krishna, and then they have demigods. There are people who lack faith in God Nitai. So they may have God Nitai, but they will also have Krishna. So they have some faith in God Nitai, but they do not have exclusive faith. So they say, okay, God Nitai is there, but maybe, I don't know, but let me keep Radha Krishna also, just in case. Right? So this notion of hedging your bets because you lack faith. So such a person, they lack faith in Bhakti. So they hedge their bets. Right? And fortuitously, Bhakti is potent. Even when it is used as a secondary Anga, it is delivering the primary result. Right? It's like somebody is taking some kind of a food to become healthy, and then somebody says, I have this small pill that you can take, and maybe it'll also. So the person hedges the bet, says, okay, let me also take this pill. And then it's actually the pill that is making the person healthy. But because he doesn't have faith in the pill, he's still eating all the other items. But actually it is that pill. So the person is fortunate that somebody came and gave him that pill. So because of the presence of Bhakti, the Gyanis attain liberation. But they don't attain the association of the Lord because they lack complete faith in Bhakti. Now, second point, and this is addressing the question that was asked, that what happens when one attains Brahman liberation? Now, the person who has attained Brahman liberation, he has lost all envy to Krishna. So these are Brahmavadis. Srila Prabhupada often criticizes Mayavadis. They're different. So they have envy to the Lord. One cannot get Brahman liberation with any kind of love, envy. But yet, they can fall out of the Brahman. And there are two reasons that are given for it. One is Andratya Yusma Anagraya. That anytime the person develops an unfavorable attitude to the Lord, because the entry into the Brahman was propelled by the favorable attitude to the Lord, even though it was an Anga, but nevertheless it was Bhakti, executed favorably to the Lord. But the Jiva is there in the Brahman, and he can still exercise his free will and Andratya Yusma Anagraya, that develop an unfavorable attitude to the Lord, and he can fall down. Second reason is that the favorable attitude of the Lord towards the Lord intensifies in the Jiva. So they are there in the Brahman, free of material contamination, but they are not satisfied. They want more in a good way. They want to serve Krishna, they want to serve his devotees. So they can again choose to come back. So the point that is made in the Chaturshloki Bhagavatam is, this is in verse 36, 2936, Yat Yat Sarvatra Sarvada, that Bhakti is present everywhere at all times. Which means that Bhakti is present in the Brahman also. It is present in the Brahma Jyoti. Right? Why would Brahma Jyoti, when it is present in the hellish conditions, when it is present in material world, then it should be present in the Brahma Jyoti. So the Jiva in the Brahma Jyoti cannot be devoid of the opportunity to execute Bhakti. but they have to avail of it. So how does this reconcile with the assurance that Lord Kapila has said that when one goes to the Brahman, it is eternal and irreversible? So the assurance given by the Lord is that the Prakriti can never affect the Jiva. That's why it is eternal and irreversible. But the Jiva can once again choose to become subservient to Prakriti. That's Jiva's desire. The process is irreversible. You follow this process, it will liberate the Jiva from Prakriti forever, as long as the Jiva is following the process. He may choose to elevate himself, go to Vaikuntha, right? Because it's said that the abode of Sadashiv is in Brahmajyoti. And the reason Sadashiv resides in the Brahmajyoti is he gives shelter to those jivas who want to pursue their devotional life. So even in the Brahmajyoti, the jivas can have a desire, or they can have desires to enjoy materially. I also wanted to take this opportunity to explain Prabhupada's purport in verses 22, 23, 24 in how the Prabhupada, as I mentioned earlier, he typically talks in the context of bhakti, even though the verse may be talking about Gyan or Astan. And the reason he does is because bhakti includes all the results of Gyan Astang. Right? We discussed one of the reasons is that Gyan and Astang are consumed or subsumed within bhakti. And the second is that the practices of bhakti are also similar to the practices of Gyan and Astang. So with this in mind, we'll look at some of the things that Prabhupada says. So let's look at the purport of verse 22. The Prabhupada says that devotional service in Krishna consciousness cannot be performed blindly due to material emotion or mental concoction. It is specifically mentioned here that one has to perform devotional service in full knowledge. So here Prabhupada is talking about Gyan. That bhakti includes Gyan because one performs, he says, full knowledge of the absolute truth. This is Tattva Gyan. And one understands fully the truth. Then he goes on to say, we can understand about the absolute truth by evolving transcendental knowledge, Gyan, and the result of such transcendental knowledge will be manifested by renunciation. This is Virakti. That renunciation is not temporary or artificial, but is very strong, Balisya. So we see how Prabhupada is saying that each and every accomplishment on bhakti is the same as that what Lord Kapila has been talking about on the path of Gyan, right? Because he said that it has to be Balisya, it has to be strong. So now Prabhupada is saying by the practice of bhakti, one develops renunciation, which is Balisya, which is strong. Then this development of Krishna consciousness is exhibited by proportionate material attachment or Vairagya. Right? So Lord Kapila had talked about the importance of Vairagya. Prabhupada is saying it comes through bhakti. If one does not separate oneself from material enjoyment, it is to be understood that he is not advancing in Krishna consciousness. Renunciation in Krishna consciousness is so strong that it cannot be deviated by any attractive illusion. One has to perform devotional service in full tapasya, austerity. So now this is the tapa. So Lord Kapila has said that you have to perform tapa. Prabhupada is saying that even in bhakti, one has to perform tapa. And what's the tapa? One should fast on the 2 Ekadashi days. So today is Ekadashi, we can relate to it, which fall on the 11th day of the waxing and waning moon and on the birthdays of Lord Krishna, Lord Ram, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There are many fasting days, right? So the same tapa or the notion of tapa is also accomplished through bhakti. Then he goes on to yoga. He says yogena means controlling the mind and senses. Yoga Indra Samya. Yogena implies that one is seriously absorbed in the self and is able by development of knowledge to understand his constitutional position in relationship with the super self. So the result of the yoga is Atmagyan. And Prabhupada is saying the same thing happens when one is fixed in devotional service. One develops one's own understanding. Now, having made this point that whatever is accomplished in Gyan and Bhakti are same, in the purport of verse 23, Prabhupada cautions that one should not think that they are the same. So he says the point that is being made is that Bhakti subsumes Gyan. That Gyan is there in Bhakti and Bhakti delivers much more than Gyan. So let's see what does he say in the purport. The karmis try to utilize the resources of material nature and thus become its lord and enjoy sense gratification. And the Gyanis, the salvationists who have become frustrated in enjoying the material resources, want to become one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or merge into his impersonal effulgence. These two diseases are due to material contamination. Material contamination can be consumed by devotional service because in devotional service, these two diseases, namely the desire to lord it over material nature and the desire to become one with the Supreme Lord, are absent. Therefore, the cause of material existence is at once consumed by careful discharge of devotional service. So he's saying that in Gyan there is still truti. There is still that desire to become one with the Lord. Now, this is not the Mayavadi one, but this is that Gyan. The main drawback in Gyan is aversion to service. So there is no desire to take service, but there is no desire to give service also. In Bhakti, there is a desire to give service. So Prabhupada's saying is that Bhakti is greater than Gyan because it cures both the diseases. The desire to lord it over material nature and the desire to become one with the Lord. So he's clarifying over here that just because I'm pointing out the similarities between Gyan and Bhakti, don't think they are the same. And then he goes on to say that the root difference is that Bhakti is a change in internal consciousness. So he says that a devotee in full Krishna consciousness appears superficially to be a great karmi, always working. But the inner significance of the devotee's activities is that they are meant for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. This is called bhakti or devotional service. And then he again gives the example of Arjun, that Arjun was performing ugra karma. And he was executing his swadharma. But he is still considered to be a devotee because of his consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada says that essentially bhakti is acting at the most primeval level. That the fall of the jiva is the change in consciousness and bhakti is the rectification of that change in consciousness. Then in the 24th purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that what is real swamahimni sthasya. The Lord Kapila had said that he had given those three clauses. That's one gets the right perception, swadrashtena. Then one develops discrimination between the self and the Lord, and thus Swamahimni Sthasya. Thus one gets situated in that position. So Srila Prabhupada says that is fine. But real Swamahimna Sthasya is bhakti. And less intelligent men cannot understand the position of the eternal servant of the Lord. Because the word servant is used, they become confused. They cannot understand that this is servitude, that this servitude is not the servitude of the material world. To be the servant of the Lord is the greatest position. So this is the Swamahimni Visasya. Not just the Swadarshena, not just the Ishvarasya, but that I am the servant of Krishna. That is what makes one fully independent. So this is an interesting point. Prabhupada says that when you accept that you're fully dependent, then you become fully independent. So the devotee essentially becomes a master by becoming a servant. Prabhupada says the difference between a devotee and impersonalist is that an impersonalist tries to become one with the Supreme so that he can enjoy without impediment, whereas the devotee gives up the entire mentality of enjoying and engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. That is his constitutional glorified position. At that time, he is Ishvara. He is fully independent. The real Ishvara
Hare Krishna.
I think we have lost Prabhu.
Let's move on to verse 25. Yatha.
Prabhu, we lost you for some time, Prabhu.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We lost you from real Ishvara.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't see you anymore.
We also are not able to see you, Prabhuji.
Okay.
Maybe reconnecting will help, Prabhu.
Haribol, can you hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, we can see you now.
Okay. Okay. So I was moving on to the verse 25. I know you said you lost me from Ishvarasya. I used Ishvarasya several times. Did you hear the part where I said that Prabhupada said that through this process, it's the devotee who becomes the master?
Yes, Prabhuji. We heard that, Prabhuji. To
Okay.
accept full dependence, one becomes fully independent, and to accept him as servant.
Okay, so then I know the context in which you lost me. So this is the point that Srila Prabhupada makes, that when the jiva is connected with the Lord, then he becomes Ishwar connected to the Paramishwara. So by taking the position of being dependent, he actually becomes independent. Prabhupada says the transcendental pleasure derived from loving service to the Lord is actual independence. Okay, so we are now moving on to verse 25. Yathahaya pratibuddhasya prasvapo bhavanarthabrat sa eva pratibuddhasya navai moha yakalpate. In the dreaming state, one's consciousness is almost covered, and one sees many inauspicious things. But when he is awakened and fully conscious, such inauspicious things cannot bewilder him. So Lord Kapila is now clarifying the doubt of Mother Devahuti about Puna Pratya Vatishtate. That in verse 20 she said that even if he is liberated, can he become Puna Pratya? Can he once again become contaminated by material nature? Can he come back again? And Lord Kapila is saying no. So he gives the analogy that when a person is dreaming, he may be tormented by the things that he sees in the dream. When he wakes up from that dream, then he will not be tormented by those things, even if he remembers it. So sometimes we dream about scary things. And the things are so scary that we wake up and then we say, oh, I was dreaming about this. But we may have been scared in the dream, but when we wake up, we recognize that it's a dream. So similarly, when a person has become enlightened, he may see things for what they are, but they will not affect him. So this contaminated consciousness is the dream consciousness. And Krishna consciousness is the stage of being awakened. So essentially, the stage of contaminated consciousness is caused by a lack of discrimination, avidya. And when the person is cured of this avidya, then the person is in Krishna consciousness. And what is the cure of avidya? Avidya is I am the Lord, and vidya is Krishna is the Lord. So Prabhupada says that actually, as stated in Bhagavad Gita, the only absolute enjoyer is Krishna. One can understand that Krishna is the proprietor of all the three worlds and that he is the friend of everyone, is peaceful and independent. Right? So Prabhupada is quoting the last verse on the 5th chapter, Bhuktaram Yagatapasama Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. So he's saying such a person is Shantimam Prachati. That such a person then becomes peaceful. So as long as the conditioned soul does not have this knowledge, he wants to become a humanitarian, a philanthropist, open hospitals and schools for his fellow human beings. So this Prabhupada is talking about those in the mode of material goodness. And he says that this is all illusion. For one cannot benefit anyone by material activities. If one wishes to benefit his fellow brother, he must awaken his dormant Krishna consciousness. The Krishna consciousness position is that of Pratibuddha, which means pure consciousness. Prabhupada is using this opportunity to preach also the importance of giving Krishna consciousness and the futility of doing simply material things. Okay. So I was hoping to finish this chapter, but I do not believe I will. So this chapter is actually a summation. This verse, is a summation of what's been said. I may go up by a few minutes, but for the sake of continuity and with your permission, I'd like to do this. And then the next set of verses talk about a different new topic, connected topic, but new topic. So let's do verse 26. Evam vidit tattvasya prakritir mahimanasam Yunjato na pakruto atmaramasya karachet. The influence of material nature cannot harm an enlightened soul, even though he engages in material activities, because he knows the truth of the Absolute and his mind is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So now Lord Kapila is talking about the potency of Gyan. That one might say that Gyan protects you enough that if you're away from Prakriti, you're protected. You disengage from Prakriti, you turn your back to it, you're protected. Lord Kapila is saying, not needed. Even if that person is right in the middle of Prakriti, he is still protected. The influence of the material nature cannot harm an enlightened, even though he engages in material activities. So this is the fourth set of reasons that is talking about the potency of Gyan. That it is so potent that it's like we have this COVID thing going on, right? One way of avoiding COVID is staying away from sources of infection. You're protected. But you get your vaccination and then you can jump into the, and I'm not sure if it is true, but just for effect, I'm saying you can jump into a COVID pool and still not get COVID. So that is the potency of Gyan here. That the person will not be influenced by Prakriti, even though he might be fully engaged with Prakriti, because of three reasons. Viditta Tattvasya, because he understands that all about Tattva. Tattvasya, he has a knowledge about Tattva. What is the Tattva? Atma Gyan. What is the Atma Gyan? Who's the body? Who's the soul? And who's the Lord? Then second is such a person is Atma Ramasya. Atma Ramasya is that he enjoys in the Atma. Now this Atma does not include body anymore, in the self and in Krishna. And third is Mai Manasam Yunjata, with his mind fixed on the Lord. And the result of it is Prakriti na apakruta karichat. That the material nature cannot do him any harm, even though he may be right in the middle of it. So summation of why Prakriti cannot affect a yogi. And in this summation, we will see the practices of the other angas. So Astang, Yamadvir Yoga Pate Rabhyasan, by the practice of Astang Yoga, Tapa Yuktena Yogena, and by the practice of austerity. So these are angas of Astang Yoga. Then Jnanena Drashta Tatvena, that one sees the tattvas, the truth imbued by knowledge. Drishta Dosha, one also sees the fault of Mukta Bhoga. Ishwarasya, one begins to discriminate by the eyes of knowledge the difference between the two Ishwaras, the Jiva and the Parmeshwar. And Swamahimni Sthitasya, one becomes situated on the right path consistently. Then Bhakti. Bhakti, Mai Bhaktiya, worship me, Shruta, Krishna Katha, Tivriya, energetically, Chiram, for a long time, steadily and consistently, Swadharmena, while executing one's prescribed duties. This comes under the category of karma. Then Amalatmana, with a pure mind. Anitma Nimittena, without desiring the fruits of the result. This comes again under Gyan. So the result of the pursuance of Gyan imbued with Bhakti and Karma and Astang is Pratibuddhasya, that the person is now enlightened and not in illusion. Vidita Tattvasya, that he understands the Tattvas. Atmaramasya, he enjoys or rejoices in the self. Mai Manasam Yunjata, with his mind fixed on the Lord. So this is the ultimate protection. Now, as per the Acharyas, what Lord Kapila has presented so far is a neutral presentation. Even though Lord Kapila wants Devahuti to practice bhakti, and even though she has raised valid doubts about Gyan, Lord Kapila, he does not negate Gyan. He is presenting it in a neutral way, factually giving the potency of Gyan. That when Gyan practiced with these Angas can give liberation. He does not promise anything more. He says it won't give you Krishna Bhakti, it won't give you association, personal association of Krishna, but it will definitely take you to the Brahmajyoti. Same thing Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita to the doubts of Arjun in chapter 6:35. He says, Asamshayam Mahabhago, that, oh mighty armed son of Kunti, it is very difficult to curb the mind, but possible by suitable practice and detachment. So even though Krishna is agreeing that Astanga Yoga is difficult, but he's giving a neutral presentation. He's saying that yes, it is difficult, but it is possible. The path of Astanga Yoga is difficult, but it is not useless. Now, this is also a very important point for devotees in preaching. That when you present something with neutrality, then the other person is more likely to accept it. If you present it with a personal bias, they will naturally reject it because they will think that, or they will sense that your personal bias is coloring the facts. This is why devotees who have been practicing for a long time, they find it difficult to talk to or to motivate outsiders, because when they speak about Krishna, they become excited, and they say Krishna is the best, Krishna is the greatest, and that person he has no attraction to Krishna, and he's saying this person is obviously cuckoo. He says Krishna, 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 so he does not have a balanced or a neutral perspective. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that Prabhupada did preach, because he was able to understand this and develop this mode of neutrality. That he would preach in a way that the persons would sense that Prabhupada is presenting facts in an impartial way. Other aspect, of course, is the more mystical aspect, which is being inspired by the presence of a devotee. So this is more from the perspective of Nyaya, that when you're preaching, if you preach with a lot of personal fervor, then the other person will back away. But if you present it in neutrality, then the person will accept what you're saying and will inquire further. Lord Kapila is presenting Gyan in the mode of neutrality, so that the person who is hearing will accept his mood of neutrality. And then when he will start glorifying bhakti, then the person will accept that also. Okay, so like I said, this verse summarizes the previous verses, so I'll stop over here and see if there's any discussion.
Prabhu, it's not a question. You used to do it in a tabular way. Do you have it in a tabular form, this set of verses?
The summation, yeah, I have a table. I'll send it to Prem Kishore Prabhu.
Yeah, because it's quite interesting. It's like the yoga ladder, but it's very interesting the way Lord Kapila is putting it.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, in verse 24, you mentioned that there are two reasons why a person in Brahmajyoti can come down, because when he develops an unfavorable attitude, or when he is not satisfied because he wants more association, because his constitutional position is a servant of Lord, that is, then he may choose to come down. And in the next verse, like Kapil Dev is clarifying Devhuti's doubt that one will, once liberated, he will not come back again, with the example of a dream. So here, am I missed any context, Prabhuji? Like,
So the context here is I think I did speak about it. The context here is the free will of the jiva. So I did speak quite a bit about it, saying that how the two things reconcile. That Lord Kapila is making a statement that the process is eternal. As long as the jiva is following that process and he's subscribing to that notion, Prakriti can never affect him, which means that he will always be in Brahmajyoti. But his free will is never taken away from him. If the free will manifests, factually speaking, even though we get the sense that the jivas in the Brahmajyoti are constantly falling down, but factually speaking, very few jivas leave the Brahmajyoti. You can see the process that they follow. It's not a, we generally, as devotees, we say, oh, what's Brahmajyoti, right? Anybody can go to it or whatever it is. But it's you can see the process. This is a synopsis of the process. It is a very, it requires a huge amount of commitment and great amount of purification. So when a person has gone through that, through lives after lives after life, then the person is strongly anchored in that mood. And when he achieves Brahmajyoti, he's happy with that. So as devotees, we find it difficult. Just like, we say that, why should somebody be in Shantaras? Right? It's difficult for us to imagine that why would somebody be happy with being a bush and a creeper in the spiritual world when they can have fun with Krishna in his personal association. But that bush and creeper is perfectly happy in their service. Now, we are not thinking like that because we are pure devotees and we want, we are eternal associates of Krishna. We are thinking like that from the material perspective. That better than bush and creeper is the cow, and better than the cow is the gopas, better than gopis. So we have the mentality of wanting to be at the top of the food chain, material mentality. We are just transposing it, and we find it difficult to do, but actually they're fully satisfied. So similarly, those who go to Brahmajyoti, they're fully satisfied. Almost all of them stay there. But yes, the reason that they would leave from there is because of these two reasons, which does not mean that the process is temporary, which means that just like they took to the process out of their free will, they can stop taking to that process out of their free will.
Yes, Prabhuji, that was the mistake I was thinking. Once he reached the Brahmajyoti, I was thinking that, okay, he reached Brahmajyoti, result achieved. So, I underlyingly assumed that they would have stopped the process. But
yeah, it's not that they're captured by the Brahmajyoti, right? They enter into the Brahmajyoti with great happiness that, that yes, I have come to this Om Shanti Shanti phase. So, with lot of difficult endeavor, lot of practice, many, many lifetimes they enter there. So they're happy. That's the kind of happiness they want. So they're happy there. But yeah, any moment they can change their mind. I mean, there are jivas in the spiritual world like us who were unhappy over there. So what to speak about Brahmajyoti? Right? There are jivas in the spiritual world who get unhappy with Krishna and they fall down from there. So the free will can act at any point of time to anyone. Okay. Any other comments, questions?
Just a follow up on the question on this same thing, Prabhu. When the jiva after attaining Brahman realization, in the Brahmajyoti, then the second type of people who come back to the world, material world, is to associate and do more service to the devotees. So those are the ones who are not affected by the material modes. Am I right? Because they are still in the mood of service, in the mood of associating with the devotees, or unlike one who falls down to do some philanthropic work.
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think your question is that there's a category of jivas that we talked about who desire to elevate from the Brahmajyoti So they don't fall down, they want to elevate themselves from the Brahmajyoti by performing bhakti, which means that they haven't lost their realization that I'm not material world, I'm not the material modes, etc. So when they come down to the material world, how do they come down? Right? Do they come down as philanthropists who are under the mode of goodness? Do they come down as devotees pursuing the devotional life? I'm trying to think, but neither Vishwanath Chakravarti nor Srila Prabhupada talks more about it. Other than making this reference, they don't talk more about the specifics. So difficult for me to comment on it. Okay. Okay, thank you. So we'll end over here. My apologies for overshooting. Vanchakalpatarubhayascha kripa sindhubhyev cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nithai Gaur Premanand. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.